Hello everyone, it's your favorite shaper of Rio. I am coming at you with another video. I wanted to make this video in basically I saw a Reddit post about, why everybody is using Comet to trigger everything, and I wanted to make a video on like my thoughts on the matter. Because this is a pretty interesting topic. Seeing that, nearly what is it, 20, so look at POE Ninja, Fate of the Val characters, 27% of people are playing Comet. In level 90 plus it's 28%, and when you click on the main skills, it is always, well, not always, but 93% of the time it is linked to cast on critical. So that's a large number. So why is everybody using specifically Comet to trigger on cast on critical and not other skills? So I want to do a little exploration. First I want to look at the spirit gems themselves, and then I want to look at the skills themselves to kind of see why this is the case. So let's jump right in. First off, we're going to go to here. We're going to go to all gems. We're going to say cast. Oh, not cast. So we have a couple options here. We have the invocations. Invocations are not what we're talking about here. They are a button that you have to push to make all of the triggers come out, versus these cast-ons, which just trigger themselves. Cast on minion death. Don't really see this used too much. Cast on dodge is a meme. That leaves us with cast on elemental ailment, cast on critical. Cast on elemental ailment and cast on critical both get energy, and they have maximum energy based on the base cast time of the socketed skill, which means if you have a base cast time of 0.5 seconds, your maximum energy is now 50, and that is the 50 is the number you need to achieve to be able to trigger that skill. Cast time of 1 is 100 energy, and so on. So elemental ailment gets you energy per power of enemies you freeze, ignite, or shock with hits from skills. This is generally used a little less because to be able to trigger this very often, you need to reliably hit the source over and over again with ignites, shocks, or freezes. This can be done if you have like a really low shock duration, ignite duration, freeze duration, or if you can apply multiple at the same time. Most notably on Wyvern and on Incinerate, you can stack ignite, and that does count over and over again, allowing you to trigger this very, very fast. So the more traditional option is the cast on critical, which is a lot easier to trigger. Because it gains 1 energy per power of enemies you critically hit with skills. And this is any skill. Any skill that you hit an enemy with will give this energy, as long as it passes the ailment threshold. That's a whole nother issue. I'm not going to get into that. So cast on critical also has a socketed 20% less damage tacked onto it, which is significant, sort of. It's significant in the fact that 20% less damage is a lot of damage, but when it comes to specifically our favorite boy, Comet, it is basically irrelevant. But it is irrelevant for a lot of these other skills that do a lot less damage than Comet does. So this is the golden boy of all of these triggering, unless you're doing specifically like an Incinerate build with here, at least from what I've seen. Some other people might argue that, maybe cast on dodge or minion death is better, or the elemental ailment is better than critical, but, that's not for me to say. You can only have one of these, as opposed to, I think in point 2, you could have multiple of the same skill, but not multiple of the same support, but they switched it, so now you can only have one of any skill, but you can have multiple of any support. Which I think is a lot better, because the one of any support was very weird. It kind of led to you having a weird thing, but again, I'm not going to get into that. Anyways. So, where does that leave us now? That leaves us with the skills themselves. So obviously we're looking at, all right, cast on critical is the option. We're going, blood mage because it makes our base crit really high, or we're going shaman for enable to criticals, whatever you're doing, or you just have really high critical hit chance and you're critting things over and over to trigger that. So we have our cast on critical set up. Now we need to figure out what spell to put in it. So we're just going to start from the bottom. Primal spells. Entangle. You got a limit of 8 fissures. I'm pretty sure every time you cast this, it's only 1 fissure. You could have, the additional, I think it's upheaval support gem in there to cast more, but then you get way less damage. And then additionally, this only does 86 to 129 physical damage. When you're triggering something, first of all, cast on critical is a skill itself. It can have up to 5 support slots, and then one of the support slots has to be the spell that you're triggering, and likely another one is going to be boundless energy. So that leaves you with 5 minus 2, which is now 3. So you have 3 slots that you can put damaging things in, and you really want to capitalize on those, because that's basically all the more damage you're going to get off of those. So you want to do your best to pick something that's relatively higher damage than this, and maybe something that's going to be a little more impactful than Entangle. So with that in mind, we're going to take that and we're going to go down the list of things. So Volcano, it has a limit. If there's only one, there's a limit of 1. That means we can only have 1 out on the field, barring any limit plus add additional things, whatever. We have 1 volcano. So when we trigger on cast on critical multiple times over and over, it's just going to keep casting that 1 volcano over and over. You're not going to get crazy amounts of anything. So skills with a limit are bad. Skills with low damage are bad to put in there. So then we look at Thunderstorm. Okay. Thunderstorm, it drenches the enemy. It shocks them. It's, cool. It has lower lightning damage, but it's alright. But look at that. Alright, it has a limit. Alright, so we go on to the next one. Thrashing Vines. I believe this can only be used on vines itself, so we just have to, plus limit a 1 vine growth area. A limit thing, like a tornado, or like, okay, cool, maybe physical damage per second, yada yada yada, and the 1 tornado limit. So that's out the window. We're going to skip a limit. We'll go to a cold. So, Contagion, well, first, we'll say Unearth. Unearth, 90 to 135 physical damage. This is a minion skill. You could trigger it if you wanted to, but generally it's not very great. The cone's kind of, it's not the biggest there, as you can see. And, you want to generally hit a lot of things. Or at least that's what people thinking when they're using it as a clear. Contagion, not generally something you'd use because this is used with Essence Drain in a combo. I guess if you were to Essence Drain and then cast on critical Contagion for some reason, you could get like a weird thing going on. They're pretty weird. Bone Cage, you have to stand still too, so not good. Enfeebles a curse. Those are minions. Pain Offering, it hits a minion. Bone Storm, channeling skill, can't use that, doesn't work. Detonate Dead. Detonate Dead you could use, but you need a corpse next to you. So you generally need to kill the enemy to be able to use Detonate Dead, because you need a corpse to be able to detonate. You need the dead to detonate. So that's out. Profane Ritual. Another corpse needs a corpse to be able to activate, and its damage over time, generally not very good. That's a curse. That's a curse. That's a totem. Don't use those. Or we can't use those. Hex Blast. Hex Blast would be interesting. The only problem is you need to curse the enemies, and maybe that's not a problem for some builds, but that's generally not what people are going to be doing. on a generic kind of scale. That's more of a specialized kind of mechanic. But, you know, people will find ways to do things. All right, so at least with our elemental spells. All right, so what elemental spells can we work with? So let's go. Let's start with the fire spells. All right, flame wall. You can only have one flame wall. Or maybe you can have more, but it's damage over time. It ignites enemies, but that's generally not what you're trying to do when you're triggering things. So that's kind of out. Fireball. Fireball is an okay one. You need the infusion to really make it shine, because then it explodes out. But it does have a chance, just by itself. Or, not anymore, actually. Never mind. They took that away. Fireball used to explode just by itself as like, I believe it was like a chance, but they took it away. So now you needed infusion to make Fireball good. So you need to rely on something to give you infusions to be able to reliably use Fireball. And if you're using it to trigger things, the chances are you aren't going to have infusions very often, unless you do some shenanigans to get them, which case that's out of the scope of what I'm trying to set up here. All right, Living Bomb. It's a limit. It's bad. Because that is a limit. Ember Fusillade. You could. The problem with Ember is that you need a lot of these projectiles to do you know, an amount of damage. There's something to be said about the spell is very good. I do really like this spell. It's just that it needs a very specific setup to be able to function in a triggering in a triggered sense. You need a lot of extra projectile stuff going on. You need a lot of you need infusions to be able to be triggered. It's a whole thing. Generally speaking, if you're using this, you're using it on a lot of different things. Snap is technically a fire skill. You need to ignite the enemy first beforehand, though, so you would need some sort of fire damage to be able to capitalize on this. And it brings us to our kind of next problem with spells in general. Cooldown times. There's a lot of spells with random cooldowns that kind of kill the spell for it triggering. Because if I have a spell, in this case Snap, it's got a 4-second cooldown time, but a cast time of 0.5 seconds, which means my cast on critical has a maximum of 50 energy. If I'm hitting, say I'm using Spark to trigger cast on critical, if I'm hitting 8 enemies at a time, and those are all critting, and I'm getting all of that energy, if I'm triggering Snap, if I'm maxing out the energy on cast on critical multiple times, let's say I shoot out like I cast Spark like 3 times, and the 3 sparks net me like 100 energy in like, you know, let's say like half a second, right? So normally what it would do, it would max it out, cast the Snap, max it again, cast the Snap again. Problem is that now Snap has a cooldown on it, which means that it can't be triggered more more than once every 4 seconds, which is a severe detriment to Snap as a triggered skill. Otherwise, Snap would be amazing, because that is pretty good damage. Saying 20 to 387 lightning, you know, 358 to 536 cold damage, and 145 to 218 fire, and it gives you infusions on top of that, and its explosion radius, so it could go over and over again, which would make it really desirable. The problem is that it has a cooldown. So moving on from that, Incinerate, you can't use it. It's a channeling spell. Firestorm, you can't use it. It's a limit. Most you can get, I think, is 4 firestorms, and even if, like, I don't think it does the most damage. It also relies heavily on infusions to do extra things. And then Flame Blast, it's another channeling skill. You can't use it. And is a cooldown of 10 seconds. So, you know, it's kind of like a double whammy bad. So that's it for our fire spells. Now, let's look at our lightning spells. to see what people would use. So Spark, you actually can use zero point 0.7 seconds, which makes it 70 energy, which makes it actually 30 energy less to be able to trigger, which is desirable in specifically my build. But that's, I'm not going to get into that because that's, you know, specific to the Mjolnir build that I'm playing, and why I'm using Spark. But generally speaking, Spark could be used. If you wanted to do maximum amount of damage, you do want to lightning infuse it. Or not lightning, cold infuse it, so it does both cold damage and lightning damage. Because it's a pretty good amount of cold damage and a pretty significant amount of lightning damage when paired together. And it fires all 16 projectiles in a circle. And this part doesn't matter because this is not base cast time. Cast on critical only cares about this number here. So it doesn't even increase the amount of energies you need to proc it. It just needs to consume it. So maybe you can do like a, you know, there's people who probably use Spark on triggering builds to get even more projectiles in the field. It'd be pretty good. So that's something that I, you know, do myself, but I use it for bossing, but that's whatever. So let me look at Orb of Storms. Orb of Storms. What is up with Orb of Storms? Orb of Storms has a 0.8 cast time, which means it has 80 maximum energy when slotted and cast on critical. The problem is it has a limit of 1 orb. Now, normally, like, logically, you'd think about this and you'd say, okay, well, maybe this isn't a bad idea, because if my Orb of Storms gives me a Lightning Infusion Remnant when it expires, or when it goes away, that'd be good. But, except it doesn't do that. The problem is that when it goes away, it just goes away. It doesn't give you it. It has to expire to give you the Lightning Remnant. So it's just double bad. Not to mention the duration of this is 12 whole seconds, so you need to wait to get the infusion anyways. And to make full use of this, you need to be casting spells inside of the orb to actually make it deal damage. So, I mean, some people might like this. Also, it's closer range, so it's kind of like whatever. Generally speaking, limit is bad, so I'm just not gonna go further into that. Let's see, arc 110 cast time, you know, a little higher, 110, but it does 16 to 298 lightning damage and chains 8 times. When it's lightning infused, it chains to 6 additional times and does 200% more damage. And 50% increase in magnitude of shock inflicted. It's a pretty good. Arc is another good one. It's probably the only other one that you primarily would want to trigger. In my opinion, some people might have differing opinions. I don't think many of the other ones really compare. I think it's like Comet is first and like Arc is second, but that's whatever. Mana Tempest is a lightning spell, but it is a buff. So skip it. Lightning Warp. Lightning Warp, in theory, if this didn't have the condition of having to coal an enemy, or having to target a coalable enemy, this would be great. The issue is that you can only use this on a target that has that little blue marker above their head, which severely limits the amount of uses that you get out of this. I still use it in my Mjolnir build because, you know, occasionally I'll get to, you know, flick around the screen. But not very often. So, that's kind of off the table. Ball Lightning. There's nothing inherently wrong with this skill. The only issue is that it needs to be fire infused to do anything. The explosion is really nice. But you need all the fire infusions to actually make that like a viable, like, okay, this spell does now does damage kind of deal. And does even more when on ignited ground. But yeah, fire infusions or nothing on the skill, which kind of limits it because that means you need to acquire fire infusions, and the primary way of acquiring fire infusions is to use snap on something to get the infusions. Or living bomb, which is like just no. Um, but hey, maybe somebody make it work. And then lightning conduit. Lightning conduit would probably be like my second, or probably my third used one, if it also didn't have its limiter, which is its 8-second cooldown time. Now, this is absurd. This skill, Lightning Conduit, actually used to compete with Comet in like 0.1. Because the shock effectiveness that was happening with a lot of people with using Spark and Archmage and Stormweaver, or Gemling with the mana stacking, it actually was a very good contender. Like, people were doing the cast on Comet things with the Infernalist, but then also people were doing the Spark Lightning Conduit things on Stormweaver and on Gemling. And then they slapped Lightning Conduit with an 8-second cooldown, which absolutely killed this skill. Like, if you're going to use this to trigger things, it's just, you literally can't. Unless you get this 8-second number down to like, maybe like, 1 second, or like maybe like even like, ideally it'd be like 0.5 maybe. But that's a lot. And at that point, you might as well be running a Choir of the Storm with that amount of decreased cooldown time, or reduced cooldown time, and just auto bomb things. But anyways, Lightning Conduit can't really be used because it has an 8-second cooldown. Otherwise, this would be the primary lightning skill to use on triggered abilities. So now we're going to go into Ice ones. I'm going to run through these really quickly. Ice Nova, you could use it. It's just, it's really small. AoE, requires you to be close range, can't do it. That reliably. Frost Bomb is a limit and a cooldown time. Kind of double whammy there. Sucks. Frost Darts, nothing inherently wrong with this. Just kind of lower damage, which kind of isn't too appealing for triggering things. Frostbolt, not bad. It's just slow. Like, if you watch the little video here, the only problem with it is that it's slow, which generally doesn't play very nicely. Yeah, but I mean, generally speaking, this is like a combo skill anyways. You Frostbolt, and then you cast Ice Nova onto the Frostbolt, to kind of do that. So maybe there's a merit, and like later on there's like a pretty fun build that I played in POE1 was cast on critical with a Cosprey's Malice with a Cyclone. So I'd Cyclone around Ice Nova-ing and Frostbolting. Frostbolt will then shoot out, and you cast Ice Nova onto the Frostbolt. So maybe that'll be later on, but not right now. Nothing here. Frostwall, same thing with Flame Wall. It's with one use, cooldown time of 5 seconds. Not very good. And then Eye of Winter, which is a cooldown time of 10 seconds, and it doesn't do damage unless it passes through Elemental Ground. So you need an Elemental Ground effect or an Orb, and then it actually does something. But still, it has a cast time of 140 and then a cooldown of 10 whole seconds. It's very severe. So that leaves us with Comet. So what's wrong with Comet? Well, let's look. It costs 142 mana. All right, not a problem. Cast time 1 second. Okay, 100 energy. That doesn't really seem bad. Critical hit chance 13%. That's pretty good. It's close to 15. That Blood Mage gets. Not exactly there, but close. What else is there? Okay, does 627 to 940 cold damage. That's a pretty good amount. Plus 1 second total cast time, but we don't really care about that because, again, we're triggering it. The triggers only care about this here. Impact radius 2.8 meters, and chance to repeat on quality. Oh, that's pretty good. Fire infused. You know, it does significantly more cold damage, and it doubles it with fire damage, and the impact radius grows, and there's a chance to repeat. So, wait, where's the downside? See, that's the problem here. And that's mostly what I'm getting at in this video. When I explained all the spells here, there is no downside to Comet. It has high damage, it has high AoE, it has, you know, base cast time, it has the crit chance, and when fire infused, it does nearly double the damage. So when you're looking at all these other spells, remember when I was talking about the things like, okay, Spark, lower damage, could work. Limit on Orb of Storms. Arc could work, lower damage than Comet does, and higher base cast rate here, and it requires an infusion. Spark also requires an infusion. Lightning Warp has to be used on a cold target. Ball Lightning has to be infused. Lightning Conduit has an 8-second cooldown. Flame Blast, channeling, can't use it. You know, Eye of Winter, can't use it. 8-second cooldown, or 10-second cooldown. Frost Bomb, 6-second cooldown, and limit. Snap, 4-second cooldown. Like, Living Bomb, there's a limit to one active seed. So when I'm like running through all of these other ones, like there's always something that you need to do to get the extra mile from it. With Comet, that just doesn't exist. There is no, you don't have to do anything to get the extra mile. You don't have to infuse this. 627, 940 cold damage is already good. It's just that you fire infuse it, it just makes it better. That's like Headhunter. Like, Headhunter doesn't make your build fast. It makes faster builds faster. Like, Infusions don't make Comet good. It just makes it... Like, Comet is already good. It just makes Comet better. That's all. Whereas, like, most of these other skills, you need an infusion to make the skill good. Which, inherent, like, as a design perspective, I'm not a game dev or anything like that, but, like, even as, like, just a random consumer of the content, I look at that, I'm like, why does this exist? Why is Comet the only skill that gets to be good without any sort of extra bonus? Like, it just gets to be good at base. Like, all of these skills should be good at base. I think everything should be at the level of Comet when it has at like a base form. I'm not saying like everything should do the amount of damage. I'm saying the general feel of the skill, everything should be at Comet's level before anything. Like, Spark is a pretty good example. You know, Spark is pretty good by itself. It is better with cold infusion. But like the same can't be said for all of these. Like, Firestorm at base does nothing. Fireball now, the way they changed it, does nothing unless you have infusions on it. Eye of Winter does nothing unless you have like some sort of elemental ground effect or, you know, orb being played. Like Lightning Conduit, it's just like, it's just bad now. It like, people argue that this is still good, and it might be on specifically Stormwaver, where you can have two 35% shocks or whatever, or two shocks of X amount of magnitude, and that would count, and it would be good, but that's only on one class, and that's not how it should be measured. But yeah, so that's essentially what I was getting at with this video. Going through that whole TLDR, Comet is good because it has no restrictions, it does good damage, it has, you know, good amount of crit chance on top of it, so you don't even need to build Blood Mage, you can trigger it on anything else. It's just Blood Mage is the primary way to do it, because you're triggering over and over. Like, it's not even close. Like, I think they seriously need to improve on some of these other skills to kind of bring them up to the level of, like, people are like, okay, well, I do this because, you know, it feels pretty good to just throw it in there. and call it a day. I feel like most things should just feel pretty good to just use. Which a lot of these things don't, unfortunately. And they might feel good through the campaign, but they don't feel good when you come to endgame. Like, and even Comet doesn't feel good unless you're triggering. If you're self-casting Comet, it feels awful. Like, it's genuinely bad to play. At least in my opinion. It feels bad to play. But this video is all about triggering things and what, you know, what's good to trigger, what's not good to trigger. Well, and then you can break it down to like my setup where it's like, okay, well, Thunder God's Wrath requires me, it's essentially a lightning spell on melee hit. So what do I trigger on lightning spells? Well, if we go back to here, there's only 2 lightning spells we can actually use, and it's Spark and Arc. With some other conditional cases, but like primarily when spamming things, can't spam Lightning Conduit, can't spam Ball Lightning because I don't have Fire Infusions, can't spam Lightning Warp because it has to be used on a cold enemy, mana things above, Orb of Storms has a limit of 1 orbs that literally only leaves me with 2, Spark and Arc, and then occasionally I'll trigger a Snap and a Lightning Warp randomly. It's not even like something that I build for, it's there for, you know, generic like, oh, this kind of happened purpose. So yeah, that's basically it. That's what I wanted to talk about. There's a whole slew of reasons as to why you might, you know, use Comet over the other ones, mostly just pertaining to the amount of supports that it has when it comes to, you know, damage. Like, you look at Comet, you have like Zenith is here, 90% more spell damage. I should spell damage. Yeah, there we go. Control Destruction, I wouldn't use this because you're building critical, unless you're like me and you have Control Destruction on there because you don't care if you crit with Comet. Coursing Cascade, less damage. Spell Cascade, less damage. Unleash, less damage for each seal. Zenith is more damage, but requires you to be above 90% of your max mana. Consider Casting, less cast speed, 30% more damage. Fiery Death doesn't do anything. Inhibitor doesn't do anything. Mana Flare relies on your current mana to do fire damage, which is kind of weird. Sacrifice life on use. This isn't bad. Damage extra chaos damage. Element Discharge, again, consumes something to make it happen. This requires them to be shocked. This requires you to heavy stun. This, again, shock. Zenith, again, is the same thing as the other one, above mana. Concussive spells. Yeah. So, I mean, in my opinion, there's not a whole lot of things that you do. Obviously, there's Elements of Focus here. You know, there's Brutality, it gets rid of some things, but I don't know. There's not really like a whole lot of options you can pick from, which, I mean, in the end, isn't really a bad deal, but when you don't have all of the, like attack skills have elemental armament, they have the attunements on there that you can use, they have, you know, rage that goes on to attacks, you have rapid attacks, which builds on top of that. And that's just some of like the normal ones that you can do off of that. I mean, you can also put elemental focus on these things, like to get more elemental damage out of those. There's a bunch of physical damage things. If I just go to all gems and I say physical damage, like there's brutality here. There's heavy swing. At least half dozen other ones, more physical hit damage. Brutality 3, like there's so many more ways to get damage out of those, and when you're dealing with spells that and really don't get an excess amount of those things, you want to pick the highest damage, and unfortunately that just leaves Comet. Comet does the most damage, is what it is. That's what GG decided to do. I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying that's it's out there. That being said, I basically said everything that I wanted to say. I just, like I said, wanted to explain why I think Comet is used so much. And I think it's pretty, I mean, a lot of people make arguments for other ones, but like when it comes down to it, Comet's just the easiest one to slot in for the most benefit. But anyways, I hope you liked the video. Consider subscribing, like the channel. Come chat with me in Twitch when I'm live. Chat with me in the comments, and we'll maybe see what happens from there.